Have you ever wondered what life inside a convent is actually like? This is my cell. It was small and peaceful. There was a bed, a desk, a chair, a lamp, and perhaps a few books, and everything had a purpose. The cell was a place for prayer, reading, and quiet reflection, to step away from the busyness of life. This is the guest kitchen, and it is used where visitors can make themselves feel at home. When I first arrived, I was welcomed warmly by the sisters, who immediately made me feel at home. They explained the daily routine and encouraged me to join in as much as I wanted. What struck me right away was how normal everything felt. It wasn't gloomy or mysterious, it felt peaceful and welcoming. The sisters had work to do. Some cared for gardens, some cooked meals, some welcomed guests, and others worked in ministries beyond the convent. One of the biggest surprises was silence. Not silence as a punishment or something awkward, but silence as a chance to slow down without constant noise, phones and distractions. There was time to think, pray, and simply be still. This is the library. The shelves were filled with all kinds of books, Bibles, theology, church history. One of the most peaceful places in the convent was the garden. It wasn't just somewhere to look at, it was very much part of life of the community. The sisters cared for it throughout the year, planting flowers, growing vegetables, and making sure it remained a place of beauty and quiet. Walking through the garden, I noticed how calm everything felt. There were paths to wander along, benches where you could sit and pray or read, and a bird song that seemed to replace the noise of everyday life. It was the kind of place that encouraged you to slow down. Some of the produce was grown in the garden, was used in the kitchen, and caring for the plants was seen as another form of service. Whether someone was watering flowers, pulling weeds, or harvesting vegetables, it was all done with the same spirit of care and gratitude. What I loved most was the garden reflected the rhythm of the convent life itself, quiet, unhurried, and full of simple beauty. It reminded me that not everything has to be rushed, and that sometimes the most meaningful moments come from slowing down and appreciating the world around us. I often went out there at different times of the day. In the morning, the air felt fresh and still. In the afternoon, there was warmth and light across the paths. In the evening, everything became quieter, and the garden almost felt like it was resting too. It changed depending on the time, and that made it feel alive in a very gentle way. The sisters treated the garden as part of their service and prayer life. It wasn't separate from their faith, it was connected to it. Working in the soil, planting seeds, weeding and harvesting were all seen as meaningful tasks. There was something grounding about that idea that care for the creation is part of spiritual life and not separate from it. One of my favourite things was just sitting on one of the benches and listening. You notice things you normally miss. Birds moving through the hedges, wind in the trees, the distant sound of the convent bell calling people to prayer. It all blended together into something very peaceful. What I took from the garden most of all was its sense of balance. It wasn't perfect or controlled, but it was cared for. It reminded me that life doesn't always need to be rushed or overfilled. Sometimes it's enough to tend to what's in front of you, be patient and let things grow in their own time. I also noticed how the garden changed the way people moved. Inside, the convent life had a clear structure, prayer times, meals, work, but outside, in the garden, everything slowed down even more. People naturally spoke more softly. Even footsteps felt different, like the ground itself encouraged a gentler pace. Sometimes I would walk the same path several times a day and notice completely different details each time. A flower opening, a patch of sunlight shifting, a change in the wind. It made me realise how much we normally miss when we're not paying attention. The sisters had a very practical relationship with the garden, but also a thoughtful one. It wasn't treated as a separate from their spiritual life. In a way, it was part of it. Working outside wasn't just maintenance, it was a form of care and attention, almost like another kind of prayer. There was also a strong sense of continuity. The garden didn't belong to one moment in time. It had been planted, tended, and shaped over years, even decades. You could feel that history in it. It made me think about how small, repeated actions, watering, planting, pruning, made something last longer over time. One of the most memorable moments for me was simply just sitting there without doing anything. No phone, no conversation, no task. Just sitting and watching the light move across the plants. At first it felt strange, but eventually it became one of the most peaceful parts of the entire stay. Looking back, I think the garden reflected the convent itself. Quiet, steady, unhurried, and full of care. Nothing flashy, nothing rushed, just constant attention to what matters one day at a time. As you can see, there is a deer in the garden. It attracts wildlife. What struck me most was how the garden seemed to teach patience without ever saying a word. You can't hurry plants, you can't force seasons, you can only work with what is already happening. That idea started to slowly shift of how I thought about time in general. At times I would see other guests or sisters walking slowly through the space, each in their own quiet moment. No one rushed past. There was an unspoken understanding garden that wasn't a place to pass through quickly, it was a place to arrive in. Staying in an Anglican convent wasn't about escaping the world, it was about living intentionally, finding meaning in everyday tasks, caring for others, and creating space for prayer and reflection. It challenged some of my assumptions and left me with deeper appreciation for simplicity, community, and peace. If you've ever visited a monastery, a convent, or retreat house, I'd love to hear about your experience.